Have you ever considered that there's something amazing hidden in the places you passed or drove past on your way to work today? Literally, a couple of kilometers from your home, there are places that saved lives thousands of years ago. It could be a deep rock overhang, a barely noticeable cave entrance, the dense canopy of an old tree, or a deep eroded riverbank where you could find shelter from a torrential downpour. These natural shelters have stood there for centuries. Today, we rush past them in warm metal boxes with air conditioners and heaters, looking out at the world through the windshield at high speed. We think the landscape around us is just a decoration. And that's because no one teaches us to look for these places and read nature's signs anymore. But in ancient times, precise knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, about exactly where to run when the sky became dangerous was humanity's most valuable treasure. This knowledge was valued far more than the ability to shoot a bow accurately, track a wild animal, or handle the finest weapon. Everything depended on this simple skill. It was a fine line between a tribe that calmly survived a 3-day ice storm and a group that lost its members to horrific hypothermia before the sun even broke through the clouds. In our time, these advanced survival skills have been completely erased from memory. Most modern people wouldn't be able to find even the most basic natural shelter within a kilometer of their home if they suddenly found themselves outside in a thunderstorm without a phone or umbrella. But our distant ancestors could do it with their eyes closed. And what they knew about rain, cold, and the physics of survival without any artificial materials was far more intelligent, profound, and practical than anything we're taught today in schools or advanced survival courses. Let's start with the main thing. What was a heavy downpour for the prehistoric world? It wasn't just a minor inconvenience, like needing to put on a hood or open an umbrella. Rain in the wild is a veritable avalanche of deadly threats that hit a person simultaneously, and they must be dealt with simultaneously. Otherwise, they will kill you. The first and most immediate danger is a sharp temperature drop. In a typical forest or steppe environment, during a strong storm, the air temperature around you drops by 4 to 8 degrees in just half an hour. Imagine a primitive hunter. He's been running for a long time after his prey, overcoming fatigue, soaking wet with sweat. And then a torrent of icy water hits him. Remember that our ancestors didn't have waterproof jackets, membrane fabrics, or warm thermal underwear. Clothing made from animal skins, carefully treated with fat, was at least somewhat resistant to moisture. But items made from hastily woven blades of grass and plant fibers would soak through in a matter of minutes. As soon as such clothing became wet, it instantly turned into a heavy lump of ice, which, instead of providing warmth, became the main threat, rapidly sucking heat from the body. The fastest way to die in a storm is to be left in wet clothes in a piercing, icy wind. The second major threat is the immediate loss of control over space and reduced visibility. A heavy downpour literally shuts down all human senses that protect us from predators. The rain instantly crushes all sense to the ground, making it impossible to detect the approach of a large animal. The deafening sound of raindrops hitting leaves, grass, and bushes completely masks and drowns out any acoustic sounds, the cracking of branches or the footsteps of predators making their way through the dense undergrowth. A dense wall of water reduces visibility, which previously allowed one to spot danger from afar to just a few meters. As soon as a storm arrived, primitive people instantly became blind and deaf in the face of the wild. The third serious danger is lightning. Modern researchers often think that hiding under a tall, solitary tree during a thunderstorm was simply a stupid and naive mistake made by savages. But for ancient people, it was a brutal mathematical calculation and a forced choice between two deaths. Either remain in the open and are guaranteed to die from the icy wind and hypothermia, or take a risk and stand under a tree to gain at least some protection from the torrential waters. Mistakes in this game were deadly, and lightning killed people not only with a direct hit to the head. The electrical discharge strikes the tree, travels into the ground and instantly spreads across the wet soil in all directions. A single such strike within a 15-meter radius of the shelter could easily kill an entire group of people simply due to the current passing through the damp ground beneath their feet. Our ancestors didn't learn the rules of this dangerous game from physics textbooks. They learned through the most brutal and visual method in the world. They watched their relatives die before their very eyes and memorized the exact locations where they stood, never to return there again. That's why ancient knowledge of shelters was never a haphazard improvisation. They were painstakingly collected, tested in real-life conditions, and carefully passed down from hand to hand over thousands of generations. Archaeologists are finding traces of ancient dwellings that go back much further than most people realize. For example, the famous Terra Amata site in southern France, excavated by scientists back in 1966, has proven that people were building real defensive structures approximately 400,000 years ago. Archaeologists discovered distinct holes left by wooden posts, fire pits protected from the wind, and a well-thought-out division of space. These weren't savages huddling in a panic under a cliff. These were builders who created houses with a specific purpose in strictly defined locations and for very important ecological reasons. The choice of site 400,000 years ago wasn't random. The houses were built on a sandy beach terrace where natural hills and protrusions of land broke and deflected the strong gusts of wind blowing from the sea. Ancient craftsmen knew perfectly well the direction the wind blew most often and knew how to use this to their advantage. Furthermore, they had an intimate understanding of the movement of water. They built all their dwellings on small, barely noticeable elevations. Why? So that rainwater during heavy rainfall would flow away down the slopes, rather than collect in muddy puddles on the floor beneath the bodies of sleeping people. This was true applied hydrology, developed hundreds of thousands of years before the advent of science. And it was managed by people who simply knew how to carefully observe the world and memorize how water moves across the earth. But the most detailed and revealing archive of primeval secrets is hidden in ordinary rocks and stone grottos. An ordinary stone canopy overhead may seem like a simple stone roof to a modern person, but to an experienced shelter seeker, it is a complex system where every detail matters. Ancient people assessed the parameters of a cliff automatically, on the fly, while our contemporaries don't notice them at all. In this case, the direction of the cliff was much more important than the size of its overhang. Imagine a grotto in the northern hemisphere, facing south. All summer and winter, it catches and absorbs the sun's rays. This enormous rock mass heats up during the day like a veritable furnace, and at night, it gently radiates this heat back to people, warming them in the darkness. The same canopy, but facing north, offers no thermal benefit. Furthermore, during the cold season, due to the constant shade and drafts, the interior of such a northern rock becomes much colder than the open air. Our ancestors didn't know the clever scientific terms of radiative cooling or the heat capacity of rock, but they knew the end result perfectly well. This rock will be warm at night, and that one will be a glacier. This knowledge was passed down as an inviolable law of life. Another important secret is the geometry of a fire and the behavior of smoke. Can you build a fire under a rock without suffocating? Ancient people knew the answer already. If the rock shelter is too shallow and short and too high, the wind will swirl the air currents so that all the smoke will be drawn into the shelter. It will become impossible to live there, and the fire will become a suffocating trap. But if the shelter's depth and height are perfectly balanced, the right pressure differential will occur. The smoke from the fire rises gently upward, presses against the stone ceiling, and escapes in a steady stream, leaving those below warm and with clean air. Irregular geometry led to death from carbon monoxide poisoning, and only those communities whose ancestors noticed and passed on this difference in time survived. This also included an understanding of groundwater. A rock that appears completely dry in the midst of a hot summer can transform into a raging underground stream in a matter of hours during prolonged autumn rains or the spring snowmelt. In the famous French cave of Lascaux, where 17,000-year-old paintings have been preserved, scientists have found evidence of a massive water management project. The cave's ancient owners carved special drainage channels into the stone floor to channel rainwater, and in places where the water would rise highest, they built high, raised platforms for sleeping. They knew the character of their cave in all seasons because they had been collecting these observations for centuries. When there were no rocks nearby, trees came to the rescue, and here the primeval material science unfolded to its full potential. A typical dense broadleaf forest, for example an oak grove, can capture and retain 15 to 40% of all rainwater on its leaves. It simply doesn't reach the ground. But the real salvation was the old coniferous forests. The dense, multi-layered crown of a century-old spruce or fir acts like a huge natural umbrella. It intercepts and retains up to 80% of all precipitation. In the most terrible downpour, the ground beneath a century-old spruce remains virtually dry, and our ancestors always kept such living roofs in sight. But how did they manage to reach shelter before the wall of water engulfed them? It turns out they had a built-in radar, which is still hidden in your own nose. You've probably noticed that pleasant, sharp scent of freshness that appears just before a thunderstorm. Scientists have proven that when the first drops of distant rain fall on dry ground, microscopic particles of a special substance, called geosmin, are released from the soil into the air. This aroma is picked up by the wind and carried ahead of the storm front. Our nose is capable of detecting this scent in incredibly tiny concentrations. Your ancestors sensed the approach of a storm 15-20 minutes before the first clouds gathered overhead and the first thunder rumbled. This natural signal gave them precious time. It was enough to gather their children, gather their prepared materials, return to the proven rock, lift their belongings to a safe height, and most importantly, build a dry fire before moisture spoiled the tinder and wood. The arrival of rain in the ancient world completely changed human behavior. For 300,000 years, this process triggered a clear, automatic chain of actions. The tribe would suddenly shrink in space, gathering around a single hearth under a secure roof. It was in these moments, when the storm forced people to sit shoulder to shoulder for hours, that the most important things happened. Elders told stories, passed on their experiences to the young, taught children to read the signs of the landscape, and laid the foundations of culture. Bad weather made the community more cohesive and stronger. Today, this ancient ritual has been completely destroyed. When it starts to rain, all modern humans do is dart from one artificial box to another, simply pressing a doorknob. We no longer need to assess tree canopies, calculate wind direction, monitor the behavior of campfire smoke, or listen to the scents of the earth. Over 150 years of the industrial age, we have simply discarded this knowledge as unnecessary. But this loss comes at a price. We have lost the living, embedded intelligence of a species that spent hundreds of thousands of years sensing its planet. These skills don't lie dormant within us. They simply fade from culture if not practiced. But the landscape around us still remembers these rules. The rocks of your ancestors still stand in their places, hidden in forests and on slopes. And the next time you smell the sharp scent of approaching rain a few kilometers away, try asking yourself one simple question that your ancestor asked himself automatically. If I had to spend the next 3 hours in this downpour, where exactly would I run right now? The Earth still knows the answer to this question. You just need to learn to look at it again.